Hi everybody, it's Cindy with Candles and Supplies. Thanks for joining us. Today we're doing sand candles. These are super fun. So give us a shout out if you're on so that way we know like this is actually working and our internet connection is good and stuff like that. So we're actually making things today. So sand candles are sand candles were one of the first candles I ever made. So I was in third grade and I had a teacher called Mrs. Hokelander. I thought she was awesome. I mean, like she was hippie-ish and always had clogs on and this and that. And one day we made sand candles where she brought in boxes of sand and we got to make shapes in them and stuff like that. And then she poured in this like red burgundy wax that smelled like mulberries and it was just the best thing ever. And then we pulled them out and took them home and it was one of the most amazing things in my life. So that started my love for candles. So I've always had a sweet spot in my heart for sand candles. If you're going to the beach this weekend, July 4th weekend's coming up. If you're going to the beach, this is something that you could take along and do on the beach. You can do it in your kid's sandbox. They're super easy, super fun. A good summertime activity too. Just kind of, lightens up the mood. And a good summertime activity. It's also a good thing. So like not too many people, like when you're going to craft shows and stuff like that, if you're selling candles or events or whatever, a lot of people have jar candles everywhere, this and that. Sand candles, you don't see too much. And you can do a lot of fun things with them too. So what a sand candle is, it's a candle, obviously, it's got a wick, but we use sand as the container around the outside. So when you heat wax up really hot and you pour it into sand, the wax oozes itself because sand is, like a granular kind of material. The wax oozes itself into the sand and becomes its own container. So if you look at this, I'm going to bring this around for a closer look. I put like a fun agate in this too. So if you look at this one, you can see my agate, but on the top you can see that the sand is actually the container around there. So, which is awesome. Yeah, so the sand is a container itself, and then the wax is on the inside. You can refill it too. So if you make these, you can always refill them if people want them to be refilled. My goal in this is like as the candle burns down by putting the agate in there, it's going to show through the agate, like the candle light's going to show through there and everything too. Super cool for like an outdoorsy candle too. So on patios or whatever, sand candles just look pretty awesome. And they're very easy to make. Good with kids. If your kids are at home already driving you nuts on summer vacation, it's a good thing to make with kids too, because it's so easy. Anyway, so let's get started. You don't need really anything special. The sand that I use, like I said, you can use pretty much anything. I stopped by Lowe's this morning and got this just all-purpose sand. Quikrete clay sand is fine. Something a little more granular would be fine too. I've traveled out to like different beaches and they had like granular sand and made that. Like this sand's a little bit darker and a little bit more granular. I don't know where I got that, but it was in one of my travels. So, but anything's pretty much fine as long as the wax is going to soak into it. You don't want anything muddy, like you don't want clay or mud or anything like that. It's got to be definite granules like sand. But playground sandboxes are perfect game. So anyway, so the first thing you need to do after that, so you need sand. I usually put the sand in, you could do a plastic bin. This is just a box with a wax bag in it, just to keep it contained. And then I'll close it up afterwards and reuse it. But any sand you find is pretty good. It's open game. You need a heat source, obviously, to melt your wax. I'm using one of our melters, but melting pot's fine. Something to melt your wax. Color and scent, if you want to color and scent it. A wick. You need a wick for your candle. And again, these, you could do like all different shapes. You could get like, go to the dollar store and get like the sandbox toys where they can make castles and stuff like that. Literally, you could use that as, your mold, or pretty much any wick will do. I like a cord wick because they stand up nice in there. So once you pour the candle, you'll see you need it to stand up and just hold its shape for a while. So you can color and scent it. Nice beachy scents are good. You could do it white. This one I did white, but you could definitely add a color if you wanted a color in there too. All right, so you have your sand. What you want to do is just get it a little bit wet. So you want the sand to be packable. So you want it wet enough to be packable. If it's too wet, then the sand is too dense and your wax won't sink into it. But if it's not wet enough, then it's not going to pack and you're not going to be able to make like that indentation where you want to pour your wax into, because it's not going to pack, close enough for you. So you want a happy medium, not slushy and slurry, but just kind of like this to where, almost like bath bomb consistency. So you want to be able to pack it in your hands, and if you drop it, it's fine. It doesn't need to stay in its shape. We want it a little bit looser than that. So just packable, right? So I would start out with a flat surface, maybe make a little indent, and pretty much anything you can use for a mold. So you just want the shape of something to be able to put into the sand and make a mold. So I'll dig a little bit out, put this in to make the mold. This one's a little hard to get straight. So, and then you pack the sand around whatever you're using. So for this one, I'm just packing it around the bowl. And this is what keeps people occupied, kids occupied and stuff like that. They could do this forever and make lots of holes in the sand, and then you just pour wax. Tell them to pop the wick in when it gets cooler. So, all right. So this mold's all packed in, and I just kind of built the sand up around it to get like an edge around the top and everything. And then you take this out, and this is just like a dollar store bowl. This is nothing fancy, but you can see it made a nice void in here. It kind of looks like a candle. You can also do fun things like, I put an agate in here. You could put shells inside. You could put like, little floral beads, whatever, sea glass, whatever you want, just fun things around the outside. Just kind of push them into the sand. Have a little starfish here. I'll put that in. So I'll put it on this side so you guys can see it. Put that little starfish in there. So the wax will hold the starfish in, but the sand will be around kind of holding it in place while I pour the wax in. And then I'll put in another shell just for fun by the starfish, poke it in there. So I'm just going to kind of push that into the sand. That way the wax holds the shell and the starfish in place. I'll tip it up so you can kind of see it. So I have a couple things in there, and just by moving the box, it cracked a little. I'm not going to worry too much about that because the wax will go into the cracks and kind of hold itself and everything. So I'm not gonna stress over that too much. So this is packed, but not like too. I didn't really jam it and pack it tight because when I pour the wax in, I want it to be, loose enough for the wax to sink in. Okay, so we got this already. I'm not gonna put the wick in yet because we have to pour this wax really hot. So what I use for this, you want to wax with a little bit of body to it. So you want it to have at least, I use at least a 130 melt point or above. For this because I want it to melt nice and be a nice container wax, but you want it to seep in and be hard enough to be its own container as well. So anything above 130, I like for like the inside. So I just have, 130 melt point. I have kind of a menagerie of everything in here. So you want to heat the wax up super hot though. So like this wax, I want to be about 220 degrees. If it's nice and hot, the wax will sink into the sand very nicely and create the kind of, we don't want the wax to like not sink in too much. So we want that nice rim around it and everything like that. So, all right. So let me take the temperature of my wax. I have my melter set high. We're good. We're at like 224 degrees. I did already put my scent and everything in there so that we would be all ready. We're at like 224 degrees. That's good. You want it to be hot. You can even go a little hotter than that. We'll crank it up for a bit because by the time we tap the wax out, put it into the pot, it's going to be cooling off a little bit, but we want it to be hot because we want it to seep into the sand. So this is the part. So if you're doing this with kids and stuff like that, just have them step back. It's going to be dangerous. Let me pour your wax and then you can come over later. So just, keep people away just in case it kind of splashes out or whatever. Sometimes I find when I'm pouring, it just wants to make little divots. It never really splashes or anything like that. But anytime you're playing with wax that's warm, that's above boiling and stuff like that. You want to kind of keep people away. You can pour it and then they can watch it cool because it's kind of interactive when it cools and stuff like that. It cools very quick with the cool sand around it. So the wax will harden up pretty quickly for you. I'm not going to color the wax either. So I have another example on step 2 of colored wax. So I'll show you that. But that looks cool too. Okay. So I tap the wax off. It's 222 degrees, so I'm just going to gently pour it into my sand void here. Sometimes it wants to make a divot where you're pouring the wax into. That's okay. It does it. The wax or the sand is very, it's a lot heavier than the wax, so it just goes to the bottom anyway. Tricky thing about this is when you put whatever you're using for your mold. So like this, I use the bowl. But you can also, you could use a jar I use this for another one. You could use a jar. You could use, this is an empty peanut butter can. Whatever you're using, you want to make sure it's about as straight as possible, because then when you take it out of the mold, if it's not straight, it's going to kind of be crooked. So that's a hard thing to do. If you have a level, that might be a good idea. I didn't think about that, but you can use a level. But literally anything you can put in the sand to make your mold, right? So the wax is poured in here. So the wax is in there. You can see it's clear and it's already starting to cool. So once it gets a little bit cooler, that's when I'm going to put my pre-tab wick in here. Actually, since this is wide and I used a bowl, I'm going to use 2 pre-tab wicks. So that way it burns a little more evenly. So, and then these, I picked the zinc core. Like I said, I like a cord wick because cord wicks on their own, they stand up. So, right, they're going to stand up nice and tall in there. Anything without a cord is going to want to relax when it hits the hot wax. And since this wax is really hot, it's going to relax a lot easier. So I picked a cord wick just so that it would stand up nicely. And I use paraffin too. So, because that heats up a little bit thinner. If you've ever used paraffin in soy or paraffin in any kind of natural wax, you know that the natural waxes are a bit more syrupy than paraffin wax. Paraffin wax gets thinner as it gets hotter. They all get thinner, but I wanted the wax to soak into the sand really nicely. So I chose paraffin just because I knew that that would do that. So now this is getting, it's a little bit cooler now. So I'm going to put the wicks in. The wax is still pretty warm on the top. So I just got these, I have these skewers that no longer barbecue anything. So I'm just going to put them, I'll lean the wicks up against it just so the wick can like hang out and stay straight and not flop over in my candle. So that's step 1 in stand candles. So you pour the candle and then you let it sit till it gets hard in there, right? So step 2, let's pretend that that was what we just did and now they're cool, right? I poured these a few hours ago, so they are cool and everything. So what happens, sometimes when you pour the candles, they'll get like a divot in the top. So you can see this turquoise one here. It got a little bit of a divot, a little bit leaked out, and that was fine. It kind of made a river in there. That was fine. So these candles have cooled pretty much. But with a little bit of a divot, I'm just going to want to, because paraffin shrinks as it cools, and it dips around the wick. I'm just going to fill the void. A little bit of sand got in there. That's going to be okay, because as it gets a melt pool, it's just going to sink to the bottom. It shouldn't clog the wick. Sand's a little bit too big to clog a wick. Not that it can't. I'm just going to fill the void real quick. So that would be step 2. This is my pretty aqua colored wax. So if you do get a little bit of a void in there, just fill it up. This one too. That way we have some nice smooth tops. And again, the candle's just going to hang out there. And we're going to let it cool for a few more minutes. These should be ready soon. Be pretty cute. You could probably shove like shells in there at this point too. I'm going to do that. I have some fun little shells that I'll put around the side, just these little tiny ones. So my hot wax on top that I filled my void in will keep them in place. So step 3 would be where we pull the candle out. So these aren't quite cool enough to pull out yet. But I'll show you, we'll demonstrate this in a couple minutes, like at the end, I'll show you how to pull it out. But in the meantime, I made another one of these bowl candles. Same bowl that we just poured. So I pulled that out. And then sometimes the wax does goofy things, like if there's cracks in the sand, it'll go in the cracks and stuff like that. So you want to kind of correct that. And then originally, I had put these floral beads in there, but they didn't actually stick by the time it came out of the mold. That's why there's those voids. But I'm going to see if we can get them to stick now. So what we do want to do, you'll see between my finished sand candle and then this sand candle has a lot less of sand around the outside, right? Because it pulled off thinner. Maybe this wax was a little thicker. But I remember when I did this one, what I did is you want to do an over dip because this is very sandy. So think about this. This sand candle I would put in my kitchen on my table and stuff like that because it's been over dipped in wax. So what the over dip does is kind of seal the sand around the outside. This one hasn't been over dipped. So the sand is going to fall off and make a mess and sand goes everywhere. We don't want that to happen. That's kind of a pain. So what we're going to do is over dip this in just, I have like a very high melt point. It's our 156 melt point paraffin. So it's a very high melt point. So it creates a nice hard shell on the outside. That way, it's not going to be subject to heat or whatever. It's going to stay like this. When you burn the candle on the inside, the candle will burn down and leave this container around the outside so I can refill the sand candle. So, but what we can do, so like after we over dip, what I'm going to do is just push some more sand around the outside. So we'll over dip with the wax. It'll have hot wax around it. And then I'm going to put some sand in here. Just get a little extra sand. I'm going to put it in here. And after we over dip, I'll put it back. I'll put the bowl back in there and kind of scooch the sand around it. So this would be the last step. And this part you can have kids do too, because once you over dip, it's not that hot anymore. So I have my sand there. My over dip wax is back here, but I'm going to bring that over. And this kind of, once you over dip in the sand, so some of the sand gets in your wax. And this is just clear, unscented hot wax. So the sand's going to get in here. So your over dip container should be something that's you can clean out easily, right? This will hold the heat. And so this candle, I poured it about 11 o'clock this morning. So it hasn't been that long, but you can see the sand made it cool pretty quick. So I can hold it by the wick and everything. So I'm just going to go in, I'm going to dip it in to the wax, not for very long. Put it in my sand and kind of put some sand around it. That sand will stick to all the places where the hot wax is. And I'll just do that a couple times until I get like a nice sandy base around the edge and the bottom. Just going to do that again. I'm just going to keep dipping it around and putting my sand around until I get enough where I like it. It doesn't get it very hot. Even though my wax is like 200 degrees, it doesn't get the candle very hot. Could also probably add some wax to the sand and put that on. It's going to be a little hotter on your hands to do that. So, but you could try that too. And just keep going until you get like a nice coat on there. So this is already cooling off. It needs to be like a little bit hotter to keep it going. But you get a thicker coat on there and stuff. So that way it creates a nice bowl for your candle. And it's all sealed in so that the sand doesn't kind of, come out and go all over the place. So sand gets everywhere. So these are very easy. 3 steps. Get your sand box, pour your wax in there, put your wicks in, and then refill any voids. These are ready to come out now. So they're already, our re-pours a bit cool enough to pull out. So what I'll do is just remove some of the sand around the outside. Pull that thing off. And then just kind of gently pull it out. This one I used the peanut butter container for, so that came out like that. So this is a color, it's going to be a little bit colored on the outside. But this is just an empty peanut butter container. So I put it in the sand to make the mold and then poured the wax in there. Yeah, my blue colored wax. That's what that looks like. So this is all ready to over dip too. You can over dip as soon as you pull it out, and then just pack some more sand around there. That's how to make sand candles. So they're very cool. They're very fun. Actually kind of looks sugary. You can also use, so like some variants, if you get any colored sand, you could use the colored sand instead of just regular, tan sand. So a lot of times, different stores will have, like white sand or blue sand, red sand, whatever, red, white, blue sand for like Independence Day would be super cool. But you could use colored sand if you want to. Put different decorations in. So just have fun with it. It's a fun project and stuff like that. Make different shapes. You could make it in different shapes and stuff like that. So they're super fun. But thanks for joining us. Have a great week and see you next time.